Hi guys, welcome back to the desktop for another rules breakdown, and this week I'm going to do Living Steel, the 1988 game by Leading Edge Games of high-tech soldiers fighting to liberate a world from alien invaders. Now, it's a fantastic setting and a fantastic scenario, one of the best in role-playing games in my opinion, but the rules are infamously really complex and really hard. So we'll see where we go with this. The thing is, Living Steel was written by a bunch of guys who then brought out other role-playing games. They brought out the Aliens role-playing game, which was massively successful. They brought out a Terminator role-playing game, an Army of Darkness role-playing game. But after that, they brought out some very dodgy movie licenses, the Bram Stoker's Dracula and Lawnmower Man role-playing games, which never paid for themselves and led to the company going bankrupt. So the authors had to go back to their original careers, which was as rocket scientists for NASA. Because it's absolutely fascinating to read the bibliography of the authors of this, who, you know, up until 1993, they're publishing Living Steel in various source books, and the Aliens role-playing game, and the Terminator role-playing game, and Lawnmower Man role-playing game, and then it's all scientific journals on air-breathing rockets operation in high atmosphere and things like that. It goes suddenly very dry as they actually had to start doing something for a living rather than fun making games. Now, for my examples in play, I'm going to use the Vizier Rocks adventure. And we've got one of the servants of the Spectrals here, Braxadrev, who's got various attributes and various skills. Now, the way skills work in Living Steel is the Games Master sets a target number from 20 down to 1. 20 being very easy, down to 1 being extremely hard. And the very base of the game is you're rolling 3d6 under that target number. So the Games Master sets, let's say, an average target number of 10. So we're rolling a 6, and a 3. So we've rolled 15, so we've failed. However, the skills themselves add to it. So we've got espionage here. So the target number of 10, if he was trying something in espionage, would have actually been a target number of 17. So his roll of 15 there would have succeeded. You also add attributes to it. The example given in the game is that you add to climb strength and agility. So Braxadrev, if he was trying a climb, he doesn't actually have the skill. He would be adding his strength and his agility, according to a chart here on page 129. I have a small post-it note off camera, which is telling me all the pages I need to remember. So page 129. We can see that Braxadrev had a strength of 18, so he gets a +3 to his roll. And he has an agility of 14, so 0, because his attribute is between 7 and 14. So he gets a +3 to his roll. So Braxadrev, trying to climb an average rope, would have added +3 from his strength to his roll, so his target number would have been 13. So 15 would have failed, and he'd have failed to climb up. Now, as well as that, if we go back, we can see that fails and successes have a variable amount here. So, if you failed the roll by just 1, it's an ordinary failure, a blunder, fiasco, debacle, catastrophe, complete disaster for +10, and success, highly satisfactory, brilliant, major accomplishment, masterpiece, or work of genius, if you succeed by more than 10. So the successes you can get are variable. Now, initiative in Living Steel, there is no sequence which the players go. So the players can go in any order they want, but their number of actions is actually important. If we flip over to a character sheet here, because the NPC doesn't have it, they have a number of combat actions. Now, combat is broken down into 4 phases over each combat round. So this character has 8 combat actions, so in each phase they get 2 actions within each phase of the combat round. Now, if they had 6, then they would go 2-1, 2-1. If they had 4, they'd go 1 in each. If they only had 2, they'd go 1-0, 1-0. And that's the way that combat actions work. Now, every action also has a cost to it. So when a character is shooting a gun, it might not just take a single action. But they'll also get a disadvantage if they're not in a firing phase. If they just move and then they start firing, they're firing from the hip, so they get a penalty to their skill. So they'll have to spend some of their combat actions to drop into a firing stance. And that's the way it works. So you change between stances, you maneuvers and spend your points, and you spend your action points on different actions. Now, keeping combat to its absolute simplest, the Games Master gives you a target number based on the cover the target's under, their distance and the range of your weapon, and you have to roll 3d6 under it. But depending on your aim time, which is helpfully calculated out on your character sheet, or should be done ahead of time, you get a bonus to that roll. So, the Games Master decides that the target is undercover, he's so far away, the target number is, let's go for the average of 10 again. But you are just aiming for one action. So, your standard modifier is -6. So, your 10 is now a 4. So we've rolled a 2, a 2, 4. So whatever we roll here, a 6, we have failed to hit. But if the character had spent longer aiming more of his actions, up to an aim time of 7, where he'd got a bonus of 11, he would have hit, because he would have needed to roll under a 21. Now, obviously, you can calculate that down. The target number's a 10. He's rolling 3d6, so he can definitely guarantee that he's going to roll under 4 actions, or he could risk taking 3 and there's a very small chance, or a 13, so he's probably going to manage it. But that's the gamble the player has to make based on the number of actions they want to spend in a combat round doing a certain action. Now, also vital in combat is where you hit. So if we turn on to page 173, you can see the hit location and damage table, because the damage you take is going to be based on where you're hit. Now, if you're firing around cover, or your target is, you can only stand a chance to hit them in the head or arm, because their body and legs are obviously under cover. But if they're in the open, you can hit them almost anywhere. And it's a percentile dice roll to determine where you hit. So we're firing at a target under cover, and we roll a 63. So we have hit them in the arm. 63 is the shoulder. Now, knowing he's been hit in the shoulder, we have to work out the damage. So we're going to need this table for penetration summary. But flicking back to his character sheet, we can see the weapon he's using has a standard penetration of 40. And he's wearing an armor suit, which says if he's hit in the limbs, which his shoulder counts as, it has an armor factor of 2. But to help as a demonstration, we'll also note down that the body has an armor of 30. So we've got 40, 2 and 30 there. So armor protection factor of 2 only offers any protection from armor if you've got a 3, 4, 5 or 6, 7 penetration. Above that, the damage goes straight through the armor. However, if it was in the body and his penetration was 30, then he would be looking at penetration line 2. Penetration line 2 says that on a roll of a 6 to 9 on his damage dice, that he's going to be getting low velocity damage. So we take a d10 and we roll it, and we've got a 5. So the attack is only a glancing blow and does no damage at all, not even low velocity damage. On the higher levels, it's gone straight through, and if his armor rating is far higher, so if he'd got an armor rating of 70 and the penetration of his weapon was only 40, it would only be a glancing roll and he wouldn't be doing any damage. Now, looking at Trent's weapon, we can see that it's damage class 5. So we're back on this page again, and we're looking at damage class 5. So he was hit in the shoulder, and if it was low velocity damage, he received 21 points of damage and a disabling injury. However, as damage class 5, if he managed to penetrate the armor, he'd have received 500 damage. Now that 500 damage that Trent just received sounds like a lot. But if we flick over to his character sheet here, we can see that he has a knockout value of 48. So that 500 is used to determine that. And flicking on to page 41, we can see that he has an incapacitation chance. Now, 500 is obviously over 3 times his knockout value, so he has a 98% chance of being knocked out. So we roll, and we get 65, so Trent is knocked unconscious. But if he'd taken the lesser value, so it was 21 points, well, 21 points is less than his knockout value of 48. It's over 1/10 of his knockout value, so he only has a 10% chance of being knocked out. He rolls 60, and he's not knocked out. It must also be noted that the knockout roll is based on the full damage. So if Trent was shot in the shoulder a couple of times and would take 41, that would help us determine the knockout value to see whether he was rolling. So if he was shot in the shoulder 3 times, so the knockout value was now 61, which was beating his defense against it, it'd be over his knockout value, so he'd be rolling against 25. He rolls a 61 and remains conscious. Also worthy of note is that damage with a star is a disabling injury. So Trent being hit in the shoulder, his shoulder's disabled and he can't use that limb. Double star means that, or double star is required to damage a combatant on Herculon or Anastalon. So they can take various drugs which reduce damage, and they're not disabled on a 1-star piece of damage, they require 2 stars. So Trent has taken 500 points of damage. So flicking over to page 47, we can see we determine his damage total by the amount of damage he took times 10 divided by his health characteristic. So he took 500 points of damage, times 10 is 5,000, and his health characteristic is 12. So 5,000 divided by 12, looking at the calculator next to me, says it is 416. So looking on the medical aid and recovery table at 416, we go down to the lower one. So he has a healing time of 68 days for that 400. If he doesn't receive first aid in 93 minutes, he must make a health check. So we roll a percentile dice. We rolled an 86, which was not the one he needed. So he will die. If he succeeded on that roll, he would survive. Now, looking at the other type of damage he received, which was 21 points. Yep, 21 point disabling injury. So his damage total equals 21 times 10, so 210, divided by his health of 12. And again, looking at the calculator, it says that is 17.5, so 17. So the damage total we've got on the medical aid and recovery table, the nearest we've got below it, is 15. So will take 30 days to recover from that. And if he doesn't receive first aid in 72 hours, he stands an 85% chance of surviving. So we roll a 51 and he survives. But if he'd rolled over 85, then the injury would have got infected, or he'd have bled out or whatever, and he would have died of his wound. Now, looking at the medical aid and recovery table, we can see that characters can die very quickly if they receive massive amounts of damage total. So they have only a single phase to receive first aid, or they die. There is no recovery roll allowed at all. And these are phases, so 90 phases, down to 1 phase. And then we've got 4 minutes to 93 minutes, and then hours up to 79 hours. So depending on the amount of damage you received, you've got a different amount of time to get first aid. But your recovery time itself doesn't increase that much, because receiving a fairly small amount of damage takes you 30 days, whereas 100,000 points of damage there would take you 123 days. Also worth noting, you can get first aid, which has different amount of time, aid stations, which give you different amounts of survival, and field hospitals, with ever-increasing chance of you surviving. Advancement and increasing skills in Living Steel can be done in 2 ways. Firstly, if you successfully perform a skill, so using Trent's climbing here, if he successfully uses his skill and rolls under a 10, or a 10 and lower, then he receives a learning point for his climbing skill, as it works for all these other skills. When he receives enough learning points, according to this table here on page 169, so his skill is 6, he must receive 56 learning points before he can advance that skill to 7. Also, you can receive teaching. So depending on your character's teaching skill, 13, and your intelligence, which is also 13. Trent here teaching himself, his teaching skill 13 gives intelligence +1, so 14. So he gets 14 rolls per month of training to increase his skill and get learning points. So Trent has 14 rolls, and he has a learning roll of 16. So he gets to make 14 rolls, 93, 19, 42. I won't bother with all the rolls, but he records how many rolls he makes under his learning roll value. And that is how many learning points he gets to add towards increasing that skill. So for training for a month, he makes 14 rolls, trying to get lower than a 16. The number he succeeds is how many learning points he gets towards the skill that he spent a month training in. Well, that is a very brief overlook of Living Steel. I have skipped through the rules, and I've probably made a few mistakes because, as I said at the beginning, it was created by rocket scientists, one which I most definitely am not. So I did find it quite hard to work out exactly what you were supposed to be doing in all of these rules, and I've skipped through so much because it is a very complex system, but these should get you through some basic events, you know, your first combat and all that, and you can learn the more complex rules as you go along. Anyway, thank you very, very much for watching as always. Please like, subscribe, and comment below, especially telling me what disaster I've made of the rules, because that does me massive favours with the YouTube algorithm. But most of all, you look after yourselves, and I'll catch you later. Bye now.